Well, welcome everyone. This is the tutor Q&A for Brasenose College. So I'm Bronwyn Edwards. I'm the College Admissions Officer. And with me we have, Sneha, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Sneha Krishnan. I'm an Associate Professor in Human Geography and Tutorial Fellow in Geography at Brasenose College.
Have you just muted, Bronwyn? Who are you going to talk in now?
Dennis.
Yes, I can.
Oh, great.
If that's all right.
Yep.
I'm Paul Dennis. I'm the medical tutor at Brasenose, one of the medical tutors at Brasenose, I should say.
And Dave Leal and I teach philosophy here.
Great. So we're going to now head over to the questions which we've had in already this morning. So our very first question is, how is the interaction between tutors and undergraduates in the colleges? Sneha, do you want to lead with this one?
Yeah, sure. Tutors and undergraduates, friendly is a sort of one-word way of putting it, but we get to know our students quite well, actually, because every subject has a sort of small and manageable number of students, and we are your first port of call for, any questions you have, academic or, college life related. So students come to us with a very wide range of questions. We get to know our students really well. We also do, both tutorials as well as, other kinds of meetings. So we have beginning of term and end of term meetings. We meet with students to discuss pastoral issues. We often supervise our students' undergraduate dissertations. So we have lots of one-on-one time with our students. So actually quite friendly, and we get to know our students really well.
Great, thanks, Sneha. Either the other two, would you like to add anything else?
I'd like to chip in and say that one of the surprises for many undergraduates is how different the relationship is between tutors and undergraduates compared with school teachers and school students. So tutors and undergraduates are halfway to being friends, I think, by the end of the 3-year course. We get on very well, we know each other quite well personally, and a lot of students stay in touch after they've finished their time here.
And I'd just say, in just adding to Sneha's comment about us being able to communicate to the students about the college, I often find I learn a lot about the college from the students. Not always things I would want to know about the college, but I do anyway.
Great, thank you, everybody. So our next question is, if you put your opinion on a book you've read in your personal statement, will you be pushed on it in your interview? I'm hoping to do law and I'm immersing myself quite a lot, but I'm not sure how hard I'd be quizzed on the individual books, etc. I've read.
So shall I take that one on?
Yep, go for it.
So the answer is you can be. If it's in your personal statement, then it's sort of, you've advertised it and it's open season, and we could do that. So to that extent, it's good advice to say, keep a copy of your personal statement. When you say you've read something in your personal statement, make it true that you have. That's kind of good. And if what you do in your personal statement is merely give your opinion about it, then if that opinion particularly is unusual or distinctive, it might very well be that somebody who's interviewing might pick you up on that. They might not talk about your personal statement at all. It's important to recognise that that's so that it might be the interviewers for law or for another subject just want to ask very similar questions to every candidate, and they want to do so in such a way that doesn't worry too much about things you've read. But the important thing is whether your personal statement is taken seriously by us or by another university. The personal statement is the one point in which we get in touch with you personally. It may be the only point where another university does. So don't just say, I've read something and this is what I thought of it. Say, I've read something, this is what I thought of its argument and this is why. And this is what it provoked me to think further or go and read next, and give something of a sense of what it was that made you think what you thought, why it was you had the reaction that you did, because that will then help the other universities who only have that to go on to see a little bit about how you think, and it will give us a little bit more to work on if we do ask you about it in interview. It may even be that your interviewer has a rather different take on the book that you've read. Your interviewer may even have written the book that you've read and may have a very different take, therefore, from yours. And they might pick up on it. But remember, with all personal statement questions, the personal statement matters less for us than for the other universities you've applied to. Much better to say a good bit about 2 or 3 things that you have read, so we've got a sense of what you got out of them, than to give a list, even a list with one little opinion on each of them.
Can I quickly add something there? I think sometimes students feel the pressure to sort of talk about books that have been covered widely in the press or which are thought of as particularly impressive to have read. That's really not what we're looking for. So if you're going to mention that you read something and that it influenced the way that you're thinking about the subject, then make sure that it's a book that really had that effect on you, because we can often tell when you're being authentic about having actually read and understood something and had having been influenced by it. And the other thing is, even if someone brings up something you mentioned in your personal statement in your interview, we're not trying to catch you out. So don't worry about that. Often we're just trying to kind of see how you think and how you respond to prompts we might give you on that topic. So don't worry about feeling caught out at any point.
Great, thank you. So our next question, do you feel the tutor system for biochemistry at Brasenose is good? Are some colleges known for better tutors or more specialised for a specific course than others? Now, we don't actually have a biochemist tutor here today, so we would advise heading over to our Ask the Student Slido, and they'll give you all their views on our biochemistry tutors, who are all great. But in terms of the second part of your question about specific courses, Dr. Dennis, would you like to answer this one?
Yes, it's true that college tutors always have a special interest in some subject area that's part of the main topic. And I think that's unavoidable, but all college tutors are capable of teaching all the syllabus in at least the first 2 years of any course. So if there's going to be a need for very specialist teaching, which will happen probably in your final year, then we can arrange for you to go and see a tutor perhaps in another college who is a specialist in that area. So you'll find that in your final year, you may be spending some time with tutors from elsewhere, not necessarily in Brasenose. And in the first 2 years, the Brasenose tutors will be able to cover all that you need in your biochemistry syllabus. You don't need to worry about being left out or left behind because your tutor is not a specialist in subject X. In the first 2 years, everybody will be able to cover everything you need.
Great, thank you. So our next question is for Sneha. On average, how many geography students do you have per year?
At this point, 8 with 1 pool place, so 8, maybe 9.
Thank you. Next question. Are we able to visit colleges at all, i.e. this weekend, next week? I'll take this one. So unfortunately, no, because we're still not accepting visitors because of the unfortunate coronavirus pandemic. But we have lots of virtual tours on our website. So if you go to the college open day page, you'll be able to see all those videos. We've also got a great Instagram page and Twitter. So do check us out there. And if you speak to our current students on our student Slido, they'll also fill you in on how amazing Brasenose is. So next question is, hello, I was wondering if you have any information on the online interview system for this year. I hope to study fine art. Would there potentially be college interviews as well as with the Ruskin? So to answer your second question first, we do normally do a college interview as well as a Ruskin interview. This year we are online and we are still developing the exact details of that, and that will be updated on our website. And please also make sure that you join our applicant newsletter, which will have more information about remote interviews as we know it. I think that's probably hopefully answered you that one. Our next one is for Dave. How does one prepare for the TSA after doing all available past papers? Are there any other useful resources similar to the verbal/non-verbal reasoning tasks to improve your mark? Do puzzles and math/logic tasks help?
If you've done all of the available past papers, then really there is little more that one can say other than express admiration and wonder what else you've been doing with your time. Because there are really quite a large number of them between the CAAT website and our own one. What can you do in preparation? So the TSA test is 2 sections, but fundamentally 3 tasks. And the really important thing with the first section is that you get through it quick enough. This is multiple choice, 50 questions in 90 minutes. Just as a general answer to everybody who's thinking about how do I prepare, one critical element in preparing for that is just recognizing how quickly you need to be moving through the test. As I said in something I've recorded about this that may or may not ever get web mounted, because the test seems to be morphing by the week as we think about how it's going to work this year. If you had 5 minutes a question, you'd get them all right, but you don't. You've got less than 2 minutes a question, and it's that's the challenge. Each question is in the multiple choices in one of 2 forms. It's a critical thinking question, which is roughly a block of text that you've got to extract sort of data or interpret something from. Or it's a problem solving question, which is just a little bit of fairly elementary mathematics to apply quite quickly across some situation or scenario. The answers you're given, 5 of them, 3 of them are likely to be fairly quickly dismissed and 2 of them will be plausible. And your task will be, first of all, to identify those 2, and then secondly, to narrow it down to the one that you think best answers whatever the question is that you've been asked. I don't think that doing more and more of the tests after you've done 2 or 3 of them is actually going to make you better or get you a better mark. Yes, doing maths puzzles and things may possibly help you think yourself into the right kind of mindset, but if you're routinely scoring above 70, let's say, on it, then it's not obvious to me that spending a lot of time on this rather than on schoolwork or other things would be a good idea. What I would strongly recommend, and what people often I think do far too little of, is preparing for the essay. Because the writing task is something you can look at and think, oh yes, I can write a half-hour essay, and then not bother preparing for at all. The half hour is also a huge time pressure, because we would like you, very specifically like you, to answer the question that's been asked. And that will usually involve a reasonable amount of thinking about what the question means, what it demands, what the question actually is at the heart of it, what it's about, rather than just, is there a key word or couple of words in it that I know I could write about? So an example that I prepared some material on was the one on last year, which was, should school children strike on major issues like climate change? Major issues like climate change, it wasn't an essay about climate change, and yet lots of people gave me a page and a half about climate change. So do practice those. Get somebody else, maybe a friend, just to read it through, look at the question and ask, are you actually answering the question? Don't delude yourself about this. Actually face it. Am I answering that question? As I said to some people on a Slido thing earlier on, we are starry-eyed idealists. We want the next generation of politicians to answer the questions they are asked. And we start here by getting them to answer these questions. So if you're a PPE applicant, we want you to answer the question we've asked, and that will take thinking and planning. It won't just be something you can sit and start writing about immediately. So I'd say what's missing from many people's preparation is doing 2, 3, 4 practice essays and just getting themselves in the groove for doing well enough on that. This year, the essays will be done on a computer. So this year, you should be practicing both handwritten so that you get used to the idea of answering the question, and then also practice doing them on a computer. You'll be given a word limit. Don't treat the limit as a target. That's something we're going to emphasize over and over again in the stuff we put online. The limit is not a target. A good essay, for the past few years of doing TSA, essay answer marking, a good essay might be 450 words, 500 words, something of that order. And the target, therefore, if you wanted to have one in your mind, should be about there. But really just answer the question and you'll get nowhere near the word limit at all.
Thank you very much for that detailed answer, Dave.
Can I just chip in with a comment about another entrance test, the BMAT, because we have very similar questions about that. I'm a medic, so we don't use the TSA, we use BMAT, which is a kind of variant of the TSA. And the people who organise the BMAT have done some research on this question, comparing the performance in the test with the amount of preparation done for the test. And their finding exactly confirms what we've just heard, that if you've done a practice paper, your performance improves enormously compared with people who haven't ever done a practice paper. But after that first practice paper, further practice makes surprisingly little difference. And I think what that is saying is exactly what Dr. Leal's just said, that it's all about timing. And if you get the timing right, then you can get through the test easily. And the way to get the timing right is to practice one paper. If you need to do more than one, that's fine, but one paper is enough for most people.
Thank you. Dr. Dennis, do you have any particular hints on preparing for the BMAT?
The same, I think. Essentially, the BMAT has an element of thinking to it, which is time critical, really. Multiple choice questions, you really need to be able to think and gauge yourself carefully so that you answer all the questions. There's another section on school science, basically, and there is a syllabus for the BMAT so that you need to make sure that you've covered the basic school science in that syllabus to do well in the second section. And we have a short essay, which is shorter, I think, than the TSA essay, but the same guidance applies that you've already heard about the TSA essay preparation.
Excellent, thank you very much. So our next question is, hi, what percentage of your intake is typically from a state school? Now I can actually answer this because our UK freshers who are just about to start with us very soon, it's 79%. And we're always looking to keep our numbers around this percentage.
Shall we add though, Bronwyn, that that's as a percentage of what? A percentage of the UK students who are coming, or of all students who are coming?
Of our UK freshers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there will be international students in the college as well.
Yes. Thank you. So we have a couple of questions here of what's the best thing about studying English and what would your perfect English student look like? Now, as we don't quite have a English tutor here today, the best thing to do would be to go over to our student Slido, where they will tell you all about what's great about studying English and what helped them get into the college.
But we can say, can't we, that reading's a good thing.
Yes.
We kind of quite like people who read, and we especially like people who like reading and like thinking about what they read. So if you want to do English because you just like devouring books and you just can't wait to get on to the next book once you've finished one, then that's kind of probably not quite enough. If you like reading a book and then talking with somebody about what you've read, or thinking about how much better that book was than the rubbish film you saw that was notionally an adaptation of the book that you've just read, that was kind of, you saw the film and you thought, well, it couldn't be as bad as that. So you read the book and it was a lot better than the film. That will be good. So we want people who think and engage, and maybe who, perhaps you're involved in drama and you're thinking, well, how would I make this book into something that we could dramatize or stuff, because you do drama and so you kind of think about that stuff naturally. That's good. But reading, yeah, that's good. And thinking about what you read, yeah, that's great. That's kind of what we want.
And I say that would apply to pretty much all the subjects.
Absolutely. There is no mystery here. We have pretty much the same agenda for everything. Yeah.
Thanks. So Dr. Leal, another question for you. What are you looking for in a philosophy student?
Thinking. So we're looking for somebody who can think quite analytically. So the sort of skill set that we're after is one that might just as easily come from maths, or actually one of my favorite A-levels in terms of thinking about whether somebody's going to be good at philosophy, chemistry, oddly. But a sensitivity to language, I don't mean by that somebody who knows lots of languages, but somebody who is sensitive to how language works, even in the one language they speak. So let's say they only speak English, to be aware of different ways in which a sentence could be structured and mean exactly the same with the same word. So passive voice, active voice, things like that. So language and language sensitivity is important. Analysis and the capacity to engage in analytical reasoning is important. So sciences and maths are really quite good. Is it interesting that when we looked at the composition, the sort of broad kind of backgrounds of departments in the university, philosophy in some ways was more like a science department than a humanities one. We clearly do want people to be able to articulate themselves well on paper. So being able to write essays is really important. But it's not the case that we necessarily need people to be able to write fluent prose in a way that would make them, you know, a good novelist, for example. That's not the point. And we can cope with somebody's writing being a little bit halting and faltering if they can express their ideas well and have good ideas. That's absolutely fine. So if you think about where philosophy might turn up on an A-level curriculum, it might well be as a kind of humanities subject. The skill set we're looking for is only partly that. It's as sciencey as it is humanities.
Thank you. Dr. Dennis, can you answer the same question but for medicine, please?
Yes, it's a more difficult question in medicine because the Oxford medical course is actually different from the medical courses that you may take at some other medical schools, in that we spend a lot of time encouraging people to think outside the syllabus, to read more widely into basic science, and to try and work out how basic science advances will make a difference to medical practice. And so we're not looking for necessarily exactly the same skill set that other medical schools might be seeking. And I think it's quite important that you try to work out as carefully as you can whether the Oxford science-based medical course is the right one for you, because it's not the right one for everybody. Some people genuinely just want to get onto the wards, see patients, learn on the job, as it were, and that's a perfectly respectable thing to do. I'm not criticizing it in any way, but it doesn't suit everybody. Whereas in Oxford, we like to sit down and think about the science that's underlying medicine. And we do that for quite a long time without very much seeing patients. And that's not for everybody either. So it matters very much that you choose a course that's right for you. And what we're looking for is a thinker, somebody who's genuinely interested in science, wants to read about it, wants to think about it, wants to appraise how good we are at practicing medicine, whether we should be making more use of well-known basic scientific principles, and then move on to the clinical course and apply all that thinking and all that knowledge. So if that's not the way you want to learn medicine, please don't apply to Oxford. But if it is, then you'll have a great time.
Thank you. And Sneha, can you answer the same question for geography, please?
Sure. So I guess the thing about geography, sorry. Okay. I guess the thing about geography is that it's, partially a science and partially in the social sciences. So on the one hand, you might be interested in Earth systems processes. You might be interested in the sorts of things that my counterpart Giles Wiggs does, which I have to admit I don't really understand. But at the same time, I think we'd like someone who's also interested in the social sciencey aspect of things. So I think overall, really, we're looking for candidates who are broadly interested in how things are changing in the world, whether that pertains to the kind of hard science end of climate change or questions about social change in along any sort of register. So that might seem a little bit vague, but actually I find that a lot of students who we interview are students who love so many of the different aspects of what they've done in school that they can't quite pick one thing. And actually the geography course suits them well because it's an extremely sort of broad-based course where you can do a very, very wide range of things, ranging from experiments in a lab to archival work with me, where we're thinking about 18th century art. So basically, if you have a curiosity about the world and how it changes, and feel that you're interested in looking across the board, across many disciplines, geography might be the subject for you.
Great, thank you very much, everyone. So now I've got another one for you, actually. What kind of things should a geography applicant do to expand their knowledge of the subject?
What sorts of things should the applicant do to expand their knowledge of the subject? Read widely, and by that I don't just mean read books in the discipline, but read widely in any kind of critical material that you have around you, which could range from good newspapers, analytical essays in publications that you find around you, the New York Review books, that sort of thing. Or read and think about the books that you read that directly pertain to the subject. Often I find that a lot of our applicants will have read some of the recent sort of books that have emerged in the discipline that are not quite academic, but sort of speak to a broader audience. That could be a good idea if you'd like to get your hands on something like that, but it's not totally necessary. If you can't get your hands on a book like that, then read anything that's freely available to you on the internet.
Great, thanks. And I'd imagine that's similar for geography, for medicine and other subjects?
Certainly similar for medicine, yes. We'd like to encourage people to read widely. So not just medicine as a science, but medicine as it appears in the literature, for instance, medical ethics, resources to public health care, that kind of thing, as well as just basic science. And that's a good way of finding out what sort of medicine you want to practice and also what kind of doctor you want to be.
And Dave, anything to add?
Well, those who are doing philosophy at school at the moment probably are used to picking up philosophy secondhand. So what I'd like people most to do is to go and read some philosophy kind of live and just get straight into reading primary texts. One website that you could look at would be a text. So it's called Early Modern Text. And Early Modern Text, rather barbarously, is all one word. earlymoderntexts.com, I think, possibly. But look up Early Modern Text. It's a website that Jonathan Bennett, a Canadian philosopher, has set up. And he's got lots of texts that are either in English originally or translated into English by him, slightly simplified, abridged, little bits and pieces of commentary put in there, but letting you get in touch with a thinker and slowly working your way through a difficult philosophical text and thinking about it is much better than reading a blockbuster history of philosophy, which isn't actually making you engage with the thought directly at all.
Great, thank you, everyone. So our next question, in the personal statement, are you looking for the journey which brings us to Oxford, i.e. the process of deciding on the course, or are you more interested in evidence of academics? Thank you very much.
So shall I start with this and say that the personal statement is for other universities first? So here's an important thing to remember about the personal statement, that it's a personal statement for up to 5 universities, and for 4 of them it is likely to be, and medicine will be different here because other medical schools will interview, but for most of the other universities you apply for the degrees that Sneha and I are involved in and other degrees in Oxford, you'll only be interviewed here. But it's likely that for many of you, you take a test for us. You'd come to an interview, or we'd come to you through Teams or Zoom for an interview this year, but that we would get in touch with you in lots of other ways. And if we do get in touch with you in lots of other ways, including for some degrees submitted schoolwork, then we need the personal statement less. So think about it first as being for the other universities. Having said that, it's good that it says something about your journey to the subject if that's not already obvious. If you're doing 2 maths and physics and you've applied for physics, or if you've applied for engineering, well, for physics, that doesn't probably need any explaining. For engineering, though, it might do. It might be that there's something that has got you to the point where you've decided engineering rather than maths or physics. And we would, I think, want to hear a little bit about that. But we'd also want some sense of your academic personality, by which I mean absolutely not just a list of things you've done or read. We've already said a little bit about this. We want a sense of what you've read and how it changed you, what it was in what you've read that made you, have different thoughts or lead you to maybe do an experiment, or anything of that sort is going to be useful. So it'll be a mix of the two. The standard UCAS advice is that maybe 80% or a little over 80% of your personal statement should be academic. You can include something of the journey to the subject choice in that, but then the other 15-20% of your personal statement that's left can be extracurricular stuff, and genuinely purely extracurricular stuff that's just telling us a little bit about what you do. Other universities may very well be quite interested in that, but overwhelmingly it's about your chance to say a little bit to us about what makes you tick intellectually. But also it's that for other universities, and for them maybe the only way they've got. So think if you were an admitting tutor for geography or chemistry or whatever, and this was the only place where your own words were helping you to come across, what would make somebody think, actually, I want this person studying chemistry or geography or physics, whatever, at my university? And I think some medical schools, Paul, I think I'm right in this, Dr. Dennis, actually say, I think Bristol have said they don't even read the personal statement because they have all this other information.
Yes, I think that's true. Just to say that even in medicine, it's not so very different, because my students tell me that their interviews at other medical schools are much shorter and less searching than the interviews at Oxford. So for us, really the personal statement is a kind of hint about things that we could talk about at interview to find out more about you. Something, as you've heard already, something that makes you stand out from the crowd and say to us, yes, this is a student I really want to interview. I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Sometimes we're asked directly, how can I make my personal statement stand out? And I usually say to people, well, just be weird. And they say, but that would be weird. And yes, it would be, and you will stand out, and not in a good way. Actually, in some ways, what we want you to do is just be as stubbornly and steadfastly honest with us about what makes you tick intellectually, so we're getting in touch with you. The word personal in the personal statement actually is really quite seriously intended. Lots of you will have heard me say in other contexts, if I find out your mum wrote your personal statement, your mum gets the place. But it's not just personal in that sense, it's personal in the sense of opening yourself up so that you're actually helping us to gauge where you are intellectually.
Can I just quickly add to that? I think for me, often, what makes a good personal statement is a statement that tells me something about what the candidate has understood of the discipline. And I think, that can be an important thing, because when you're in school, you aren't thinking about, specific subjects and what they really are about, and then thinking about how is geography different from history, and how is it different from politics, and so on. But actually, I think a good personal statement gives us a really solid reason why you think this subject is meant for you, and that conveys something of an understanding of what you believe this subject to be. Now, I'm not looking for, you know, a totally perfect answer. I don't think any geographer could answer, you know, the question of what is geography. But I think what we'd like is something that we can work with, and that it's something that shows you've thought about what this subject is, and what about it specifically speaks to you.
Great, thank you, everyone. Our next question is, could all the tutors say what their top tips are for interviews? Sinead, do you want to start from there?
Sure. Top tips for interviews, I think, shows your work. It's a little bit like, you know, when you're doing maths in school, and you're not just required to give the right answer, you're required to show how you got there. It's a little bit like that in interviews. Regardless of, you know, what the question is, and you know, how you're dealing with it in your mind, we kind of want to know how you're getting there. Is really the purpose of the interview, I think. So you know, be forthcoming, tell us what you're thinking, feel free to say, that's interesting, I'm thinking about that. You know, allow yourself to kind of work with us on, you know, the problem that we've put forth before you. Because really, I think, at least from, you know, the perspective of you know, myself and geography interviewing, I think really what we're trying to work out is whether we can teach you, and, you know, what you'd be like in a tutorial setting. And what we're not looking for right answers and such. What we're looking for is you know, an interest in learning and the capacity to think when prompted, and so on. So show your work is really what I would say.
Thank you. Dr. Dennis?
I agree with that. It's an interview is in many ways a practice run for a tutorial, and tutorials are really important in Oxford. It's the key to the way we teach. So we use the interview to see how you think, whether you can listen to us while you're thinking, whether when we give you hints about how to answer a question, you can take in those hints and use them. And the right answer doesn't really matter very much, because if you get stuck, we'll help you. And in a tutorial, you'll have plenty of time on your own to go off and find the right answer. What we really need to know is how flexible your thinking is, and how you can use information that's given to you. So even if you are heading for the right answer, one of the perhaps more challenging tricks in an interview is to change the question slightly. If you obviously are finding the original question very easy, we can throw in a supplementary question and say, well, what about this? What about this example rather than that one? And then we'd like to see how you respond to that, just as we would in a tutorial. So show us your thinking. I agree, absolutely.
And that's, you know, given you a very good sense of what we are wanting to do. So the other thing to say in advance is, don't come in with the preconceptions that suggest that what we're really after is a 20-minute monologue. The best interviews are often very halting, very faltering. They'll be ones where you change your mind a couple of times, and where maybe there will be lots of interjection by tutors, and that might seem to you, if you've kind of got the sense that really what we're after is you talking fluently for the whole interview, or as much of it as you can, and you find it's not like that at all. Come in with your first task being to listen. Don't come in thinking what I need to do now is deliver of myself some speech that I've been prepared to give. Get rid of that in the JCR. If you were physically here, get rid of it to your granny on the phone. Just get rid of that, so that you can come and, yes, be interviewed as much with your ears as with the words that you speak. And try not to monitor too much how it's going. You may very well find that you don't have the brain space to do that anyway, but I think sometimes some people trip themselves up by thinking a little bit too much, how am I doing? When in fact what they need to be doing is just simply giving themselves to the process. One thing that often comes out of the best interviews, not necessarily the interviews that have resulted in somebody getting a place, but interviews that have gone really well, in that we've really got to meet somebody intellectually in them. Somebody will go and say, was that actually 25 minutes? Was that really half an hour? And the answer will be yes, absolutely it was, but you were so solidly engaged in thinking. that you just didn't notice the passing of time because you were so with us in the questions that we were asking you. That's a really good interview, and it ought, hopefully, to be a really good experience as well.
Great, thank you for that. So our next question is sort of quite similar, it's about tutorials as well. How do you decide what to do with students in a tutorial?
Well, that depends what the tutorial's about, but the tutorial will almost always be about the student's work. So some tutorials are what we would call a one-to-one tutorial. So the piece of work would be an essay that the student had written, in which case I, as a tutor, would read the essay and decide on the basis of the essay where the questions, where the issues were that most needed to be covered in that next hour. If it's a paired tutorial, then we would typically, in my subject anyway, focus on one of the essays. I might take one of the essays in of the two students and read it and mark it and write comments on it. But the other one, the work would be that's what we do. And so the student might, for example, read out the essay so that all of us had the same experience of the essay. And I might then ask the tutorial partner to have the first go in saying, well, what would you like to ask anything about that? What do you think there are any problems with that? And ideally, it becomes a conversation between the three of us about the essay. But what the tutorial's about is whatever that student has come up with, whose essay the tutorial is focused on. And that will depend upon reading that's been set, other reading that they've found and done, the thinking that they've produced, and then the essay that they've written, and that we're all sharing the experience of having a conversation about.
Thank you. Anything else to add?
Yeah, so I guess, so I do tutorials quite differently in that I usually don't teach one-on-one, and I always read and send emailed comments back to my students ahead of time. And then in the actual tutorial, what we do is, not so much focus on the individual essays, but instead we focus on the concepts that the essays have raised and, attempt to see if we can kind of verbally work through some of those concepts, because I think often there's a difference between, learning to write about something in an essay and actually having understood it. So tutorial is kind of an opportunity for me to see if we can kind of think about the concepts, in a number of different ways. Sometimes I'll show a video, or, we might, do something of that sort. Sometimes we'll talk about exam questions that pertain to that topic towards the end of the tutorial. There is one tutorial I always do for my second years on writing and representation and geography, which is not based on an essay at all. And this is something I enjoy doing. I tell them to write anything but an essay, or, represent what they're doing in anything but an essay, and send it to me. And responses have included an interpretive dance piece, a poem, all kinds of things. So that kind of tutorial is, rare, but really fun to do, because then we get to think about, what the form of the essay means, how that limits us in some ways. Are there other ways in which we can be analytical and so on? So I think tutorials can be, very wide-ranging set of experiences.
That's great, thank you.
One of the strengths of tutorials, I think, particularly here, is that you see the same tutor every week. So the tutor knows you as a student very well, and he'll know what your weaknesses are, and he'll know what your interests are. So if I'm reading a paper, or if I come across a clinical case, for instance, I'll be able to think to myself, I know a student who will be interested in that paper or interested in that case. And we'll change the tutorial around for that student or for that pair of students. And that works very well. I think most tutors do that, actually, that they can tune a tutorial to a student's interests. And that obviously becomes more possible as you get to know the student through the first and second years. But it's one of the great strengths of the tutorial system that you can choose what you want to talk about in the context of knowing what the students would be interested in and knowing what their weak points are, what they need to be challenged on.
Great, thank you. That all sounds like the tutorials are a really interesting experience for our students. Our next question is also for Dr. Dennis. what can a prospective medical student do to make the application stand out?
Well, again, it's difficult because if you're applying to medicine, you're applying to probably 4 medical schools, and the other medical schools might have different courses from ours. So you need to be quite careful in making sure that you don't skew your application so much for us that it becomes less impressive to the other medical schools. But for us, I think what you need is to show that you've really thought about medicine, and that you know what you're letting yourself in for. There is a bit of a concern, as you probably know, that a lot of people go into medicine and then drop out later when they realise it's not actually the bed of roses that they thought it was going to be. And also that you've thought about what kind of contribution you could make to medicine. So can you, for instance, come as somebody with a strong interest in medical ethics, or with a strong interest in basic science, or with an aim to develop a career in clinical research in due course, so that we can see what kind of a person you are. That's not to guarantee that you'll get a place, but it means that we have a much better idea of what kind of person we're talking to and what kind of things you would like to get out of the course, and therefore whether this is the right course for you. That's always the most important question for us.
Great, thank you very much. Do you have anything else to add from a geography or PPE perspective? I think we've probably covered this already.
I think we probably have, yeah.
Okay, let's move swiftly onwards. Let's find your next question. Sorry. Would fine art applicants also present their portfolio to college tutors as well as to Ruskin tutors? I can answer this for you, and the answer is yes. You would actually submit your portfolio online, but we normally ask that you bring some current work with you as well, and there'll be more information available about this for the remote interviews this year, posted shortly. And so our next question is, for all tutors, how did you get interested in your subjects originally? Dave, you want to start us off?
Yeah, okay, so the question now is which of my subjects. So I teach philosophy, and it's a rather sad story that begins with my head teacher doing a sort of one-to-one thing with all of the sixth formers and inviting us into his study and saying, what are you going to do with your life, young man, woman? And in my case, it was, what do you want to do after school, young man? And I said, well, I'm going to want to go to university, sir. And he asked which university, I think he asked before the subject, which was a curious thing to do, but he did ask which university, and it was Edinburgh I was going to go to, and he thought this was great. Then he asked what subject, and I said mathematics, and that was obviously even better because his eyes lit up, and he said, that's very good. And I thought I'd try something out, and I said, and philosophy. And at that moment, his face immediately fell. He said, don't do that. You'll never get a proper job. My wife has remembered that from time to time because I've never had a proper job. But anyway, so you'll never get a proper job. He said, it's almost as bad as sociology. Now, anybody thinking of sociology at university can hold that thought, but it's what he said. But he said it with that kind of tone of voice of adult keeping young from illicit pleasure that only makes it seem more attractive. So I thought, well, I've got to find out about this, because obviously if he thinks that badly of it, there must be something in it. Basically I discovered I loved it. So I've stuck with philosophy ever since. I went to university to Edinburgh to do maths and philosophy. It was a couple of years in before I actually found that I wasn't enjoying the maths nearly as much as I'd expected, but I was loving the philosophy. And thought I might swap to philosophy and theology, which actually meant changing universities. So I did change universities. I went to the University of Leeds and did philosophy and theology there. And both philosophy and theology are the faculties I'm a member of here in Oxford. The plan when I was 16 was to be a physical geographer, which is why I did geography, chemistry, maths and fine art at A-level. So I was the Giles protege, kind of the prototype of the sort of the person whose work you don't understand there. But anyway, so that was the plan, and look where that went. So that's my story.
The moral of the story is that don't worry too much about what you apply for.
No, the moral of the story is, head teachers, be careful what you say.
Okay, Snea, you're up next.
Okay, I have no degrees in geography at all. So I didn't have particular feelings about geography in school. I had a good geography teacher who really wanted me to do a geography degree, but I generally wasn't interested. I did a history degree, and then I came to Oxford to do my graduate education. And because of a little thing called colonialism, and we'll talk a lot more about that if you actually come here and study with me, but because of a little thing called colonialism, you study South Asian studies in Oxford in one of two departments. You're either in the Oriental Institute, and we can think about that name another time, or else you're in development studies. So I jumped from one to the other for a little while I studied sort of 20th century Indian history. But as the academic job market goes, unless you have a degree in history, it's really hard to get a history job. So I didn't. Geography is a much broader and more welcoming church, as it turns out. So I got a geography job. So now I call myself a geographer. I call myself a historical and cultural geographer these days. It turns out that history prepares you, just as well in terms of theory and, method and all of the rest of that to teach geography, as a degree in geography might. So I'm teaching you geography now, believe it or not. I think moral of that story is that I think the boundaries of disciplines are actually quite permeable. It's a little bit ridiculous, I think, that you have to choose one discipline at the end of your school career, because honestly, what do you know when you're 18? I didn't know anything. So, feel prepared for the idea that you might jump around between disciplines, that you might choose to do, something totally different with your life than what you imagine right now. But actually, your degree might prepare you for that in a weird sort of way. And that's university is a lot more than what the prospectus tells you.
Thank you. And Dr. Dennis?
I'm afraid I have only a poor story in answer to this question, because I don't think there was a time when I ever wanted to do anything else, and I just grew up feeling I wanted to do medicine, as I think many people do. It is quite surprising. We often do, or some people often do, in interviews say, why do you want to be a doctor, or how did you come to decide on medicine? And it's surprising how few candidates really genuinely have an honest answer to that question. It's just something they feel they want to do, and that was how it was with me. Sorry.
Perfectly good answer, thank you. Okay, so we've got a couple more questions. Does the inclusion of school syllabus specific texts in any subject for an international student having a different qualification, neither IB nor A levels, essential? Is it okay to include only supercurricular texts in the personal statement with a complete exclusion of the school syllabus? Thank you.
I think this one sounds like it's going to be quite subject specific, but I would have thought, we wouldn't need to be told school text, particularly if they hadn't had any particular bearing on somebody's development towards a subject. So I think the answer's just supercurricular if they're the things that have actually had the intellectual impact on you. Snea, I think you might have been going to come in there.
Yeah, sure. Short answer is, yeah, it's totally fine to, only mention text outside of your curriculum. Honestly, I don't think your tutors are super well aware of what is taught in school. So I don't think it makes a difference.
Great, thank you. Our next question is also, maybe not. Are there any options to do a dissertation or project at Oxford? What have some of your students done their projects on in the past? So it's probably best if if you all answer this one. If we start with Snea.
Sure. In geography, actually, a dissertation is a requirement. So all of our students have to write a dissertation and they do the research for this between their second and third years, so in the summer before their third year. Usually they submit their dissertation in the January before they take their exams. So the dissertation is, it's quite an important part of the degree, and the types of dissertations that students do vary very, very widely. So last year we had, I think, 4 human geography dissertations, and increasingly I think the number of dissertations is skewed in the direction of human geography. Although, as my students will attest, I often encourage at least half to jump in the direction of physical geography, because honestly, you're leaving me too much work. But even the human geography dissertations vary really widely. So there was one on Victorian women's periodicals and their construction of race. There was one on the London Tube and experiences of, gendered pleasure and danger in that experience. There was one on the geographies of sounds in a small German town. There was another one on urban planning in Madrid, I think, no, Barcelona. So that, quite varied. On the physical geography end, again, there are a number of students who do, lab work for a whole summer, or, go off and do field work on, various natural formations. So there was someone who had written about birds, about various species of birds found in a particular, wooded area in Southeast England a couple of years ago. There are people who write about urban greenery and, ecologies, urban ecologies in cities like London and Leeds and so on. So there's a very, very wide range of the types of dissertations you can do.
Thanks. Dr. Dennis, how about medicine?
Medicine also has a requirement for dissertations, in fact, both in the preclinical course and in the clinical course. And the subjects, again, vary very, very widely, from ethics to philosophy to history of medicine to laboratory research. Majority of students in Oxford probably choose laboratory research projects, but you can choose anything as long as it's medically related. And many students in medicine actually get a paper out of it, a published paper out of their dissertation. And then on the clinical course, clinical audits are a kind of dissertation that you are more or less expected to do. And many of those lead to changes in hospital practice. That's been really very encouraging. It's a nice feeling that you've made a difference to the way the hospital works because of your own research. And then some people do another dissertation as an elective, which again might be clinical research during their final year. So lots and lots of opportunities and a very wide range of subjects, almost anything you like.
And Dr. Leal?
I'm increasingly struck by the way in which geography seems to be taking every corner of the university over. Whilst it makes us suspicious about colonialism, it's actually colonizing everywhere. You can do birds, you could say it's biology, it's politics, everything. Anyway, so philosophy in Oxford is always studied with another subject. So it's never studied just as philosophy on its own. We don't have a philosophy undergraduate degree. It's philosophy and politics, economics, or theology, or modern languages, or something else. In all of those degrees, a dissertation is an option in philosophy or in the other subject, or a research project in, say, physics. It's always possible. It is not a requirement, I think, in all of them, not a requirement perhaps in any of them. I'd have to think through all 8 of the degrees to think of that. But there is no degree in which it is certainly a requirement to do a thesis, a self-chosen subject in philosophy that you write a 10 to 15,000 word essay on. You can do that on any of our degrees. You don't have to. It would typically be the case on one of our degrees that if you did do, for example, philosophy and theology, which Brasenose doesn't admit for, but let's take that therefore as an example. If you do a thesis in philosophy, if you do a long essay in philosophy, you wouldn't then do one in theology. And this would also be true for philosophy and modern languages, that you choose one or the other. It's a lot of, doing one of these things is a lot of work, but it replaces a 3-hour written paper, but it's optional. So unlike geography, unlike medicine, where you've heard that the dissertation, the project, the thesis would be something that would be required of you, and all that's left is what would it be on. In philosophy, you could simply substitute a thesis for a 3-hour exam paper. You'd have the choice to do that or not.
Great, thank you everyone. So our next question is, for humanities subjects, will the tutor's expectation be higher for a non-native international student than a normal British student?
So this is expectation in what, are we given any hints about what sense?
I presume it's in their English abilities, I would think.
Okay, so generally, native German speakers have much better English than the average English sixth former. So we just expect that. So it's expectation in that kind of way. We recognise that people who come to us having been studying in a situation where English isn't a first language, or may be the language they're being educated in for the last couple of years, but it's not their native language. Of course, there will be issues there with their English, and we do take that into account when we're thinking about how they will do in tutorials and so on. We also take into account the fact that with a 3 or a 4 year degree, by the time they finish the degree, their English will be an awful lot better than it will when they start. So fundamentally, the questions we're asking are about their capacity for the sort of thinking that we want them to be able to do. So we have people on, an obvious case would be something like a philosophy of modern languages course. We have somebody doing German literature on philosophy of modern languages who's a native German speaker. And the issue there might be, is their English good enough? And the answer is it will get better through the years, and it's good enough the first year, it'll be fine. And it turns out usually exactly to be fine. It's much more difficult if somebody's English is not good enough for us to do the kind of assessing that we need to do of all the things we've talked about. At that point, there really is a problem. And of course, if somebody doesn't have English as a first language, they will typically be asked to do one of the language aptitude or the language ability tests, IELTS, or one of these other tests. And we have set standards for those. And it is probably worth saying that the standards in humanities now are half a point higher, I think, on IELTS than they are in science. So it is an issue for us to be confident somebody's English is good enough because of the way we teach. They've got to be able to think and be quite quick in tutorials in thinking with us. But we don't, the standards are not standards about language use. They're standards about how is somebody actually going to do on the degree, and where you get by the end of spending 3 or 4 years in a college with other people speaking English with them, it's likely the English will develop pretty rapidly.
Thank you.
I mean, if it were, sorry, Bronwyn, if it were a question about do we have higher standards for international students than for home students in a general kind of way, the answer to that is absolutely not. So if you're doing one of our tests, we don't have a sort of international students have to get 5 points higher. Don't know.
Thanks. Just to add on the English language requirement aspect, we normally, if you've been taught in English for the last 3 years, you often can get a waiver. If you haven't, we might ask you to submit the test. And normally, I think all our subjects apart from maths and computer science at other colleges is higher level rather than standard level. But all that information is available online, so please do go there before you submit your application. And we only, if you were made an offer, we would only ask you to give us the certificate in the July before you started, so you would have time to get that qualification. You don't need to have it before you start. Okay, our next question. Dr. Dennis, for medicine, how much contact with real patients will there be?
Because of the way the Oxford course is split, not very much in the first 3 years. And you should be very clear about that, because there are some people who want to learn medicine by getting a lot of patient contact from the very beginning. Oxford doesn't provide that. There is some patient contact from the outset. You have college-linked general practices. You go to those general practices twice a term. There's one GP in each practice who gets to know the college's students. So you have, in effect, a GP tutor for your first 2 years. And you work through some basic clinical concepts, how to examine a patient, how to talk to patients. That's basically really about how to feel comfortable when you're talking to patients, when you are a medical student who knows absolutely no medicine at all. and it's a very gentle introduction to patient communication. After the first 3 years, then it's a full-time clinical course. So from then on, you're talking to patients all day, every day. And the clinical school's motto almost is you learn medicine by talking to patients and examining patients and watching how they progress through hospital. So if you're spending a lot of time in the library as a clinical student, you might want to ask yourself whether you're really learning medicine in the right way. So in those final years, you should be seeing patients all the time. But in the first 3 years, you are given a chance to mature as a scientist and as a thinker and provided with this very, very gentle introduction to how to talk to patients. And there isn't very much patient contact apart from that.
Excellent, thank you. Dave, we have a question for PPE for you.
Yep.
Are deferred applications generally discouraged and require an even more outstanding application in order to receive an offer?
They're not discouraged. Do they require a more outstanding? They don't require a more outstanding performance than the very best people who would get in the year that we would ordinarily be admitting people. So let's think about how that works. If you apply for a deferred place and we look at your application, you've maybe, you've submitted a test, you've done the interview, and we think there is no year when this person wouldn't have got a place for the year that most people have applied for the next year, then on that basis, we're very likely to be perfectly happy to offer a deferred place. If, on the other hand, we think this person would get a place this year for next year, but not for the year after, not for the deferred place, because, actually in some years they would be squeezed out by better candidates, then on that basis, we probably would say either, would you like to come in this case for this year, it would be 2021, or would you like to consider reapplying, which is also a perfectly respectable thing to do. And both of those things, there's no right answer there other than what the candidate actually wants. It's a fair bet to say somebody who is a good candidate for a deferred place will probably be, if we were looking for 9 candidates in for the next year, you'd need to be about equal to the 4th or 5th of those candidates or better in order to be in for a deferred place. So it's not super outstanding, better than the best person we're going to admit for the next year, but it's good enough that we would be confident of admitting you in any year and not having somebody better who we'd regret. So next year, we're going to be looking at candidates, but you've already got one of their places. If we found somebody we couldn't make an offer to next year who's better than you, we'd regret it. So that's the logic of how we do this. And I would think that's true for pretty much all subjects. Some universities in particular worry about subjects connected with maths, and PPE is quite mathsy, but in general, people can do PPE useful things with a year, so we don't worry about too much about that. But you will find universities with some subjects that are very nervous about deferred places. PPE is not one of those.
I would add, as from a general admissions perspective, we would normally advise you, if you are planning on deferred entry, is to put in your personal statement what you intend to do to keep up your academic interests while you're in your year out.
Yeah, I mean, we'll ask that, and we will also, early in the interview process, ask you to think about whether, if we made you an offer not for the deferred place but for the next year, what you'd think about that. As I say, there is no right answer to that, but we do want to prime you to think about that question because it's a question that you might end up being asked.
Thank you. The next question is a general question. I'm just going to start with Sneha. How much time do you spend researching rather than teaching?
I think it depends on the term. In Michaelmas term, which is my heaviest teaching term, I don't do a lot of research. I spend about 1 day on average out of the week, I would say, doing research and writing. rather than teaching. But in other terms, for instance, Hillary term, I do almost no lecturing. In Hillary term, I actually do a lot of researching and writing. I would say 2 or 3 days out of the week is mostly just research and writing. But on average, I would like to spend 50% of my time researching. Doesn't always work out like that. As much as I can manage, really.
Dr. Dennis?
In my case, none, because I don't do any research anymore. That's because I used to run, until quite recently, a graduate medical course, which took all the time that I had when I wasn't teaching undergraduates. So that's what I would have done instead, and that did take up really quite a lot of time. On the other hand, it was something that was complementary to the undergraduate teaching, so it didn't feel as if I was making a choice between the two.
And Dr. Leal?
At the moment, very little time. I wrote something back in the spring in a burst, but I find that it's when I've got a week or 2 weeks free that I can actually give to something. So I am in my university role as another one of these admin roles. I'm the schools liaison officer and the admissions coordinator for philosophy, and it is almost unbelievable how much time that has taken up this summer with A-level results and moving people around between colleges. And we normally wouldn't have the universities or the Conference of Colleges Admissions Committee meeting at all. It's met almost every other week through the summer, and I've had many other meetings as well. So if you do for a period have quite a heavy administrative task in the university, you don't end up spending very much time researching at all. When I have done bits and pieces recently, they've usually looked like they were going to become tips of much larger things, and hopefully time becomes available. But this year has not been a year when getting time for research has been particularly easy, actually, for anybody, because of the way that teaching has actually taken a lot more time. I found last term that teaching over the internet was actually much more time consuming. I don't know if others found that as well. So in bursts of a week or 2 weeks at a time, but it's not a set fraction of my time at all.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Just to clarify there that the term names at Oxford are slightly strange. So we have Michaelmas, which is the autumn term, Hilary, which runs from January through to Easter, and Trinity, which is the summer term. So it's a little Oxford quirk for you. So our next question is, what would you say would be the most important thing to know about the admissions process? Thank you. Who wants this one?
Apply by the 15th of October.
Yes.
That's absolutely the most important thing to know. If you don't know that, then you're going to have problems. That's the most important thing of all.
Yes, and if you're doing any course that needs a test, make sure you register for that by the relevant date as well. And if you are facing any problems with that because of the lockdown, please do get in touch, because at least the TSA and some other tests are now being set up for electronic proctoring. So it may be that if you're for example in Melbourne and you just cannot do the test, it might be that it's possible to do that electronically now. So please do look at the links on the main websites for that, and that should hopefully be able to point you in the right direction to get that set up.
It's worth saying that 15th of October quick was absolutely right, but as Bronwyn says, you also need to apply for tests. I think, am I right, that the LNAT test actually must be taken before the 15th of October?
The LNAT has a certain window of date. So again, please do look at our website for the exact dates on that.
But the important thing here is that window is before the 15th of October. Yes. So you get the skids on to get that done first. Yeah. And
they have also changed the date slightly for some of the tests this year to allow for social distancing. So again, make sure you've got the right date, make sure you're registered, and make sure you know where you're going and which day you're taking your test, because that is crucial.
And the 3 tests that affects, they're big tests, but it's only 3 of them. The TSA, the Thinking Skills Assessment Test, the Physics Aptitude Test for physics and for engineering, and possibly other things as well, but those are the 2 big ones, and the History Aptitude Test. They are all moving one day to the 5th of November. They're on Thursday, the 5th of November. anybody applying for history and economics, it's a small number of people, but a significant group of our applicants need to do both a bit of the TSA and the history aptitude test, but they are moving together to the same day. So you'll be able to do them both on the 5th.
Excellent, thank you. And just returning to that question, Sneha, what would you say would be the most important thing to know about the admissions process?
Apply, really, but what is the most important thing to know about the admissions process? The fact that we're not looking for candidates who know everything about geography already and who are, without flaws, entirely amazing. We know that you're not yet undergraduates, you've just finished school. We aren't looking for, people who are reinventing the wheel, really. What we want to know is that you can think. And I say this because very often I think that's the kind of pressure that candidates put on themselves before they come for interviews. They look like they're scared everyone else has done something absolutely amazing, and they're just ordinary. Everyone is perfectly ordinary, I promise you. As your tutors, as I think we've shown you with our somewhat weird journeys to where we've got to. Just apply and know that we're not expecting you to be unbelievably amazing. All we're expecting is that you know how to think a little bit.
Thank you. And Dr. Dennis, anything to add?
Nothing to add. I think that covers the ground very well.
Thank you. Got another question for Dave. Do all colleges welcome mature students to apply for PPE, or are they advised to apply only to Harris Manchester?
All colleges welcome mature students to apply. You can apply to any college at all. My understanding is that Harris Manchester College have been allocated the special privilege, if you like, of if a college does not decide that they want to reserve or sort of, as it were, select for interview just for themselves a mature candidate, that candidate will then be reallocated to Harris Manchester anyway. So there's a sense in which you lose nothing by applying to a college other than Harris Manchester. The worst that can happen is that you get eventually reallocated to Harris Manchester. The label mature student covers a whole variety of different categories of candidate, those who've had a career, maybe done a degree before. So there are people who are in their 40s who apply. There are people who are in their 20s who apply. We have people coming to study with us who've done military service in other countries and who may just have come relatively young, but still in the official mature candidate status, which is over 21 by the time they arrive. So you could be just 21 when you arrive and fit really very easily into an undergraduate college. I think most colleges would think that somebody in their 40s or 50s might well not fit quite so well in a common room that was fundamentally sort of composed of people who were in their 20s or younger. And they might, but anyone can apply, and you could be an extremely interesting candidate that any college who you apply to would be very keen to see and to engage with. You don't have to apply to Harris Manchester, but that is where particularly most of the older mature candidates do end up, and they are very well placed to actually assess mature candidates' applications in a way that many ordinary undergraduate colleges aren't, because you probably won't have recent A-levels or any of the things that we'd be using to use to assess you.
Excellent, thank you. And one question here is, do mature students usually get access to the HCR or the MCR? And just for our wider viewers, this is the graduate common room.
Bronwyn, do you know the answer to that?
I think it is possible to be an associate MCR member. And so, for example, if you are doing in most colleges at least, if you're doing a 4-year course, which includes a master's, you would actually be able to apply to be an associate MCR member so that you could be with the effectively graduate students, even though you're actually still technically an undergraduate. So I would imagine the answer is yes, but if you are concerned about that, do email us or the college you're going to apply for, and I'm sure they'll get back to you with a more definite answer.
But as an undergraduate,
So our next question, which is quite an interesting one. What's changed about course content for your courses recently? For instance, new research or new ways of thinking? Sneha, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, sure. What's changed about the geography course recently? So we've included in the last 2 or 3 years a lot more material that is, emerging from critical turns in geography towards understanding race and gender on more critical terms. Some of this is down to the fact that the department's hired a lot of people recently that work on these themes. So for instance, our head of school, Gillian Rose, is a feminist geographer. Amber Murray, my colleague at Mansfield College, is a geographer of West Africa. I work on colonial South Asia and so on. So with the sort of, growth in the number of scholars working on these themes, and also a push from our students who have wanted more gender and race critical material in their curriculum, we have substantially more, both lectures in the core courses as well as options that deal directly with questions of race and gender.
Excellent, thank you. Dave?
So in philosophy, some of those same kind of slightly, turns of culture have come in too. So our a paper that we've had for years called Knowledge and Reality, or sort of Metaphysics and Theory of Knowledge, it was once called. We now have a tutorial topic on the metaphysics of race. We have the opportunity in philosophy to trial papers before they become a part of the curriculum to see what the take-up is and how the teaching of them works. We had for a little while a paper on the philosophy and economics of the environment, and possibly partly because of the way that we'd set the teaching up for that, that turned out to be unsustainable. Unsustainable is a kind of quite good word in that context, I suppose. But some of the themes of that have now become part of an economics paper in PPE. There's a feminist philosophy paper that is now, I think, just coming into its 3rd year, and that is at the moment a special paper, but we're fully expecting that to become an embedded part of the curriculum. So we can try ideas out both within papers and across Oxford. The area that's expanded and that has resulted in a new finals paper most recently that's a permanent fixture on the stocks is what we call practical ethics. We have a major centre for medical ethics research that is embedded within both philosophy and the medical community in Oxford, and a number of people who do work on a variety of politico-philosophical questions. And that's resulted in our having an undergraduate paper in practical ethics, which covers a whole variety of medical, political, economic topics. And that's, you can study theoretical ethics and then do the practical ethics paper as well. So those are things that have come about both partly because of the way in which the discipline has developed, but also because centres of expertise have become available in Oxford and there's the availability of teaching. So why not use it to enrich the curriculum?
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Dennis?
In medicine, we can divide this into 2, I think, because medicine itself changes, obviously, and the teaching has to keep up with that. So there's a lot more teaching now on therapies for cancer than there used to be, a lot more teaching on interventional radiology, and a lot more teaching on rheumatology, that is, problems of joints and connective tissues, than there used to be a few years ago. And the other half of the answer is about ways in which we teach doctors, teach medical students. We now teach much more medical ethics than we used to, and much, much more about communication skills. That is, how we get across information to patients, and probably more importantly, how we listen to what patients are telling us and how we interpret what they're saying. So 2 answers to that question, and there have been really quite big changes in medical teaching in recent years.
Excellent, thank you. So a humanities question next. What are the average number of books you need to read a week to write the weekly essay?
That's absolutely going to depend on the subject within humanities and on what's being asked of you. If you're being asked in English to write an essay about Jane Austen's corpus, then the answer is 6 bigger books, some smaller books, and you need to know them all. If, on the other hand, it's an essay in early modern philosophy on a particular aspect of a particular philosopher, then brief story, because I know we're coming up to 2:30. One of my undergraduates, when I was teaching at the University of Leeds, came back a week early from his Christmas vacation of his first year. And he set himself the task of doing some reading. And he thought he was going to do lots and lots of reading. And he came away utterly frustrated, having taken a whole week to get through the half dozen or so pages of the 3rd chapter of Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy. And I was very proud of him having come back to read at all. And I said this to my head of department, and he said, "What? He managed it in a week?" As if somehow those 6 pages in a week was an act of prodigious capacity and showed just great sort of philosophical ability. It depends. It may not be books. It may be 2 or 3 papers that will take you a week or half a week to get through, because they're very difficult. Philosophy will be different from literature. Theories about literature will be different from reading literature directly. Maybe people will typically be getting through a couple of books a week or 3 books a week. Often it's not books though, it's chapters or it's papers. And so it's very hard to say. But the critical thing is not how much you're reading, but how well you read. And I don't think that's best couched in terms of number of anything. It's couched in terms of the capacity to recognize when the reading is an uphill struggle that you need to slow down and really understand. And that might be the 6 pages in a week kind of reading. And there will be others where basically you can just get on and read and, you know, be confident in your reading that as you read page by page, you've got what's there to be understood.
Excellent, thank you. I think we should, honestly, have anything else to add? I think we should probably leave that there. Thank you so much for your insights and answers. That's been really helpful. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed watching. And yes, we're going to record, this has been recorded, so it will be posted online as well. So if you joined us late and you want to find out what we discussed earlier, please do watch. There's a lot at the start of the session about personal statements and the TSA test, which I know some people are interested in. So do make sure to watch us back. And thank you for watching.
Thanks, Bronwyn.